The warmth from the fireplace still lingered in the hallway, as Alina Parkson, 6 years old, vanished from the quiet neighborhood of Redwood Lane in McDonough, Georgia, population 22,084. Christmas evening drew to a close with a layer of cold mist settling over the lawn, the decorative lights swaying gently in the wind like the last remnants of the holiday. At 9:15 p.m., the family's neighbor, Mrs. Melinda Graves, waved through the kitchen window when she saw Alina clutching her cloth doll as she crossed the narrow hallway separating the living room from the old wooden staircase. The little girl was carrying the doll with the pink ribbon, the Christmas gift Mrs. Graves had given her the previous year, still carrying a faint lavender scent. The elderly woman watched until the small figure of Alina disappeared around the corner, her cream-colored wool socks the last bright spot in the windless hallway. What happened in the 8 hours that followed would haunt McDonough for more than a decade. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the morning of December 26, 2011, in the small town of McDonough, the atmosphere after the holiday season remained deeply quiet. The side streets around the eastern residential area of the city were still covered in the dampness of the cold night, and most families were still in a state of rest after the busy holiday days. The two-story home of the Parkson family, located at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, was no exception. The family consisted of Benjamin Parkson, a software engineer, his wife Emily Parkson, an administrative support staff member at a local elementary school, and their only daughter, 6-year-old Alina Parkson. The previous evening, December 25, they had attended the community event held in the central square, featuring a music program and holiday light display. Alina, after a long day of activity, appeared tired when the family left the square and returned home around 9:30 p.m. Inside the house, the three of them unpacked their belongings, changed clothes, and prepared to end the day. Alina struggled to stay awake, repeatedly rubbing her eyes from sleepiness, and Emily decided to take her upstairs to rest earlier than usual. Around 10:15 p.m., Alina was carried into her room, placed on the bed, and carefully tucked in. The bedroom was neatly tidied, toys in their proper places, and a small nightlight glowed dimly in the corner. Emily left the room after a final check to ensure the child was settled in sleep. Throughout the night, no one in the family heard any unusual sounds. On the morning of December 26, shortly after 7 a.m., Emily went upstairs to call her daughter down for breakfast and noticed Alina's bedroom door slightly ajar, something rare, as the girl usually closed it when sleeping. When she pushed the door open, Emily saw the bed tidier than usual, with the blanket only slightly shifted, but showing no signs that a small child had recently left it. Not finding Alina in the adjacent bathroom, she immediately called Benjamin upstairs to help search. The two checked every room in the house: living room, kitchen, garage, laundry room, closets, and finally, the entire ground floor. There were no traces or sounds indicating Alina was still inside the house. Benjamin opened the back door to check the yard, porch, and lawn area, but found no signs of anyone having passed through. None of Alina's belongings were missing. Her coat, shoes, backpack were all in their proper places, and there was no clear clue suggesting a 6-year-old could have left the house on her own in the early morning. The silence in the home made the situation alarming. After rechecking all possible places Alina could be one more time without finding her, Emily returned to the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the landline phone and dialed emergency services. Her voice tense and urgent, she reported that their daughter was no longer in the house and they didn't know when she had disappeared. The 911 call was received at 7:12 a.m., marking the official entry of the missing person case into the authorities' response system. Just minutes later, the first responding unit from the Henry County Sheriff's Office arrived at the Parkson home and began implementing the standard 2011 emergency missing child protocol. The first two officers approached the front door, confirmed details with the parents, and quickly moved to verify the missing status, checking all rooms in the house to ensure the child wasn't hiding or sleeping out of sight, inspecting potentially hazardous areas such as closets, the garage, backyard, and under stairs. After completing the quick sweep, they noted no signs of Alina's presence in any area, qualifying the case as missing child, critical risk. Immediately afterward, the shift supervisor sealed off the home's perimeter, instructed family members to remain in the main living area for interviews, and established an initial investigation boundary with marker tape, extending to the front yard, along the western fence line, and the path leading to the backyard. Another group of officers was tasked with interviewing the parents to gather background information: the last time Alina was seen, description of her sleep clothing, daily habits, health status, recent behavior, individuals present around the home the previous evening, and any unusual activity during the Christmas week. Benjamin and Emily provided a timeline from returning home on the evening of December 25th until the morning discovery that Alina was gone from her room. During the scene documentation, officers observed the overall surrounding area. Both front and back doors were locked with no signs of forced entry. Ground floor windows were closed. The living room carpet showed no signs of disturbance. Kitchen items were orderly, with no objects overturned or shifted. The child's bedroom showed no signs of struggle or items removed. Alina's personal items such as coat, shoes, backpack, and toys remained in place, indicating she had not prepared to leave the house voluntarily in any way. From this series of observations, the lead officer concluded the initial risk assessment, the likelihood of the child leaving on her own in the early morning, was near zero, while the possibility of being taken by an external party became more noteworthy. They officially elevated the internal alert level and proceeded to the next step in the protocol, initiating a primary search in the immediate vicinity. A two-person team with a K-9 unit was dispatched to begin tracking in the backyard and along the side paths of the house. Concurrently, other officers began checking access points from outside into the area, including the eastern pedestrian path and the western fence section described by the parents as rarely used. The Sheriff's Office communication system also sent internal alerts to patrol units within a 5-mile radius to watch for any unaccompanied small child, adults with a child, or vehicles parked unusually during the time frame from midnight to early morning. At this stage, the response force's goal was to gather any additional peripheral signs as quickly as possible to determine whether Alina had left the house naturally or been taken out during an unwitnessed period. With the preliminary conclusion that the absence of a 6-year-old did not align with any voluntary behavior, the primary search was activated immediately, the most critical phase in any child disappearance case. Moving into field deployment, the primary search team was mobilized to the Parkson home to conduct grid search round 1 within a 200-meter, 300-meter radius around the residence, starting from the front yard, following the edge of the cul-de-sac road, then fanning out toward pedestrian paths and lawns bordering the neighborhood. Officers divided into small groups, moving along marked strips to avoid missing any areas, while the K-9 unit focused on the backyard, the position assessed as most likely to reflect the child's direction of movement as she left during the night. The K-9 reacted more strongly when approaching the narrow strip of land running along the western fence, the area with the least light and foot traffic, according to the family. The search dog repeatedly stopped at a point right at the base of the fence, prompting the search team leader to request a thorough inspection of the spot. While sweeping the grass pressed against the fence, an officer discovered a small yellow object lodged between 2 layers of grass under the fence footing, a child's yellow glove. The evidence was collected per protocol, placed in a preservation bag with the location and time of recovery marked. The parents confirmed Alina owned yellow gloves, but could not definitively state that the one found at the fence belonged to her, as many families in the area also had young children using similar items in winter. Nevertheless, the glove's location coinciding with the K-9's reaction created a noteworthy hypothesis. The child may have been taken out or moved through this fence area at some point between night and early morning. The search team expanded the area a few meters around the discovery spot, but the cold, damp grass did not retain clear footprints. The fence showed no signs of displacement, and no drag marks appeared indicating forceful movement through the area during the night. Officers noted the ground was quite firm, without enough mud to preserve shoe impressions, making it impossible to track direction. Apart from the child's glove, no additional objects or signs reinforced the theory that Alina had left the house in this direction or that an external party had moved through here during the suspected time frame. With the available data, the western fence area was flagged as a point for close follow-up, and the search team continued to complete the primary search round per protocol while reporting the first piece of evidence into the system for further evaluation. When the primary search round concluded without establishing a clear direction of movement, the field commander decided to expand inspection to the entire rear wall behind the Parkson home, an area with direct access to the basement that had not been thoroughly checked earlier. This was a narrow strip of land with thin grass and little daily disturbance, thus capable of retaining traces if unusual activity occurred at night. When the K-9 unit was led along this wall, the dog's reaction became noticeably stronger upon approaching the junction between the soil bed and the basement window at the southwest corner. The dog stopped and sniffed persistently at a fixed point, forcing the team leader to request a detailed structural check. External observation revealed the basement window was cracked open a few centimeters a detail inconsistent with the family's earlier statement that all ground floor windows had been closed from the previous evening. The lower edge of the frame showed disturbed dust, distinctly different from other frames that retained a thin layer of winter dust, while the ground below remained too hard and cold to preserve clear footprints. Whether the window had been opened from inside or outside could not be determined on site, but its failure to be fully closed was a significant enough sign to report. Another team was sent back inside to check from the basement interior. The door leading down to the basement was open, and officers moved in a safe formation, using flashlights to sweep the entire storage area containing mixed household items, old cardboard boxes, and infrequently used equipment. When light reached the area directly beneath the cracked open window, the inspection team discovered a dark blue suitcase leaning against the wall, right next to the window edge. The suitcase was not on the family's listed inventory of possessions, and its position under the window made it the most suspicious object in the basement space. The exterior of the suitcase showed no major displacement or obvious scratch marks, but the distance between the suitcase edge and the window frame suggested it had been placed there rather than fallen naturally. The team photographed the scene, marked the suitcase's position, took measurements and relative distances to surrounding objects for documentation. The basement window was recorded as Evidence Item 2, and the suitcase became Evidence Item 3, both handled per protocol for preserving the scene undisturbed. Officers continued sweeping the rest of the basement for additional traces, but found no other clear signs. The discovery of the cracked open window combined with the unfamiliar suitcase directly beneath identified the basement as a potential point of entry or exit in the disappearance event. In the report to the field commander, the basement area was elevated in priority within the initial assessment chain, with a request for more in-depth technical checks to clarify the role of the cracked window and determine whether the suitcase positioned underneath was directly related to Alina's departure from the house or merely an object present from an undetermined time. However, without sufficient data to confirm a specific direction of movement from the basement area, the command team assessed that focusing solely on the house scene would not be enough to rule out the possibility that Alina had been taken outside the neighborhood in a short window after disappearing. From the observations in the backyard and basement, the search radius was expanded beyond the Parkson property to 2 miles, targeting natural trails leading toward Cotton Indian Creek and lesser-traveled roads connecting the neighborhood to the wooded area behind. The search force was divided into 3 teams, one sweeping along the trail toward the creek, the second inspecting storm drains and underground utility pipes beneath the neighborhood, and the third advancing into the sparse forest trail heading north. The sweep followed a parallel line pattern, maintaining even spacing between members to ensure full terrain coverage. In the Creek Trail team, the lead officer noted that much of the ground remained damp and capable of holding impressions, but no child footprints or drag marks were found. Fast-flowing water after the cold night further complicated sign detection. The drain inspection team used high-powered lights to examine each pipe segment. All were free of unusual traces beyond dry leaves and household debris. Meanwhile, the forest search team noticed a small pink fabric scrap caught on low brush a few meters off the trail. The fabric was collected and marked as Evidence Item 4, with its geographic position recorded for mapping reference. It could not yet be confirmed as belonging to Alina, but the color and size made it a potential piece of evidence. During the search, officers noted the presence of some local residents assisting, including Harold Pierce, who lived 2 houses away from the Parksons and frequently participated in community activities. Pierce was present with the Creek Trail search group and helped check several denser wooded spots. This was noted in the report as part of resident coordination information. Nevertheless, despite the significantly expanded scope and optimized early-stage search timing, no additional traces indicated Alina's direction of movement after leaving the house. No matching footprints, no other personal items appeared along the extended search lines, and no witnesses saw the child on the trails leading to Cotton Indian Creek. Collecting only a single piece of evidence across the wide area, combined with the absence of specific path indicators, led the search force to conclude the expanded sweep without establishing any viable route for the victim's movement from the night of December 25th to the morning of December 25th to the morning of December 26th. At the conclusion of the expanded search round, with no further traces recovered beyond the small pink fabric scrap on the forest trail, the field commander requested a compilation of all evidence collected in the 2 search phases to assess relevance and determine priority for the next review step. All evidence was brought to the temporary command post setup near the Parkson home, where the investigative team created a chronological and locational tracking table. Evidence Item 1 was the child's yellow glove, recovered at the base of the western fence in the backyard. The team marked its position with precise coordinates and confirmed it as the first evidence appearing outside the house, suggesting possible movement or activity at the fence area at some undetermined point between night and early morning. Evidence item 2 was the small pink fabric scrap, recovered on the forest trail more than a mile from the Parkson home. Initial notes indicated no clothing or item described by the parents fully matched its material or color, but its small size and appearance within the expanded search radius kept it as a potential data point. Evidence item 3 was the cracked open basement window, recorded when the canine reacted at the rear wall area. This was classified as an access point type, rather than a loose object, as the window's ajar state did not match the parents' prior description. The window was photographed in place, noting the disturbed dust edge and opening angle. Evidence item 4 was the dark blue suitcase positioned directly under the basement window, not listed among the family's declared possessions. The suitcase's size and position were measured and marked to assess its potential use as a support for movement into or out of the basement. Evidence item 5 was a faint shoe print discovered near the wall edge below the window. The print was not clear enough to identify sole pattern or exact size, but was still documented due to its proximity to the most suspicious point near the basement. When all evidence was arranged by order of recovery, the investigative team constructed a linkage table based on 3 criteria: location of appearance, time of collection, and degree of fit with the intrusion or victim movement hypothesis. Officers analyzed. The yellow glove appeared near the western fence, quite far from the basement window, making a direct connection between the 2 locations difficult. The pink fabric scrap on the forest trail lay outside the home perimeter with no data proving Alina ever reached that area. The cracked basement window and suitcase directly beneath had a clear spatial relationship, but at the time of compilation it could not be determined whether the window was open from inside or outside. The faint shoe print, though closest to the primary point of suspicion, lacked sufficient sharpness for specific matching. Officers also reviewed time correlations. All evidence was discovered after 7 a.m., when the scene had already seen significant movement by search personnel, making precise determination of when each item appeared ambiguous. These conditions forced the investigative team to classify all evidence as conditionally relevant, meaning potentially useful but not yet conclusive in their interconnections or linked to Alina's disappearance. Notably, none of these items produced a definitive direction of victim movement. No matching footprints, no clear child personal items, no traces indicating a route from the house to the wooded area, or vice versa. The basement evidence was categorized as having higher analytical value due to its direct tie to the home structure, but still lacked sufficient data to determine its role in the actual sequence of events. The preliminary assessment was completed with the conclusion that the entire body of evidence held directional value but none was decisive, and the investigative team must continue building hypotheses based on possible indirect connections between discovery points rather than a clear trail of traces. After compiling the evidence from the 2 search rounds without determining Alina's direction of movement or the mechanism by which she left the house, the field commander proposed expanding the inspection to the entire interior space of the home to rule out the possibility of overlooked evidence. A comprehensive search warrant was approved in accordance with protocol, allowing the investigative team to conduct a detailed examination of every room, every storage area, and all interior structures capable of concealing or containing relevant evidence. The examination team was divided into 2 groups. The first group handled the ground floor, including the living room, kitchen, bathroom, and storage closets. The second group handled the second floor, including the bedrooms, hallway, and staircase area. The process followed a forensic room-by-room method, meaning each room was marked, photographed in overview, then inspected section by section from top to bottom and outside to inside to ensure no detail was missed. On the ground floor, the examination team checked kitchen counter surfaces, under the dining table, cabinet drawers, closets, and household appliances. No significant signs of disturbance or foreign objects directly related to the disappearance were found. In the living room, items remained in the exact state described by the family from the previous evening, with no discarded papers or unusual correspondence. While the ground floor yielded no new results, the second floor team recorded more detailed findings. After checking Alina's bedroom and the Parkson parents' bedroom without discovering anything noteworthy, they moved to the hallway and staircase area. There, while inspecting the floor surface and gaps between the carpet and baseboards, an officer noticed the carpet edge at the third stair tread was slightly raised compared to other spots. When gently lifting the carpet layer, the team discovered a 2-page letter folded and placed against the wood underneath, out of sight, unless the carpet was lifted. The letter was collected per special document protocol, using tweezers, placed in a moisture-resistant paper evidence bag, sealed, and assigned an evidence code. Its appearance in the area directly connecting the ground floor and second floor led it to be evaluated as a high-priority item, especially given the lack of evidence that Alina left the house voluntarily. After recovery, the examination team swept the surrounding area for torn paper fragments, writing instruments, or related items. They collected several notepad sheets from the desk in the parents' bedroom and seized 2 ballpoint pens from the nightstand and Alina's small study desk for future comparison. These items were cataloged, coded, and grouped with the paper evidence for later document analysis if needed. The discovery of the 2-page letter marked a significant turning point in the house examination process, as it was the first evidence carrying informational characteristics and not mentioned in the family's initial description. In the scene report, the letter was registered as Evidence Item 6, distinct from the previously collected physical evidence, such as the glove, fabric scrap, or suitcase. After completing photography, sealing, and documenting the discovery location, the letter was transferred to the specialized document team for detailed analysis of paper material, ink, pen type, and handwriting features. The examination teams continued checking the rest of the second floor but found no additional evidence. The recovery of the letter concluded the comprehensive interior search of the Parkson home, while adding a new element to the list of evidence requiring analysis in the subsequent investigative phase. After completing the interior structural examination and recovering the 2-page letter, the investigative team shifted to reconstructing the timeline to establish the Parkson family's activity points and narrow the window during which Alina could have disappeared. Officers gathered timeline data from 3 main sources: statements from the parents and any family members present on the evening of December 25th, data from in-home devices such as lighting systems, thermostat, alarm clocks, and automatically logging electronic devices, along with traffic camera data from intersections near the neighborhood. All information was organized and coded into timeline points, starting from around 5:10 p.m. on December 25th, when the family left the Christmas event in the town center and returned home around 9:30 p.m. From 9:30 p.m. to 10:15 p.m., Benjamin and Emily's statements indicated they changed clothes, stored holiday items, and prepared Alina for bed. Thermostat data confirmed a temperature adjustment at 9:48 p.m., consistent with their described sequence. The 10:15 p.m. mark was set as the time Alina was taken to her bedroom. The mother's statement and automatic bedroom light shut-off data after 10:20 p.m. reinforced the accuracy of this point. From 10:20 p.m. to around 11:00 p.m., the couple's statements showed they were downstairs cleaning up and reviewing post-holiday work schedules. However, supporting device data was lacking, as most lights and appliances in that area did not log on-off times. The nearest traffic camera also recorded no movement related to the Parkson home during this period. This was the first gap, lasting about 40 minutes, with no independent information confirming each family member's specific location in the house. From 11:00 p.m. to 12 a.m., data from the water heater timer and heating system showed activity consistent with Benjamin's statement that he took a late shower before bed. Emily's statement indicated she went to bed around 11:20 p.m., and the hallway motion sensor light log recorded a brief activation, consistent with movement from downstairs to upstairs. The period from 12 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. became the second timeline gap. No household device data, sensors, or nearby cameras recorded activity. Statements only described both parents as asleep, but the investigative team had no independent means to verify their sleep state or exact positions during this time frame. From after 12:30 a.m. to 6:45 a.m., the timeline continued with no notable electronic or camera activity, consistent with the family sleeping through the night. Around 6:45 a.m., the staircase motion sensor recorded the first activity of the new day, consistent with Emily going upstairs to check on Alina. Subsequently, 7:12 a.m. was marked as the time the 901 call was placed, a clearly confirmed timestamp. When evaluating the 2 main timeline gaps, 10:20 p.m. to 11:20 p.m. and 12:18 a.m. and 12:18 a.m. to 12:30 a.m., the investigative team assessed their impact on the intrusion hypothesis. The first gap was considered potentially relevant because the absence of supporting data prevented pinpointing the parents' exact locations during a time when the basement window could have been tampered with. The second gap, lasting 30 minutes in the deep night, was viewed as a plausible window for an external party to approach the house if the intrusion hypothesis held. However, without signs of external movement or indoor electrical activity, a precise connection between the gaps and Alina's disappearance could not yet be concluded. The timeline was finalized with the assessment that these gaps created high-risk time zones, but there was still insufficient basis to determine direction of movement or establish any individual's role in the disappearance event. After completing the timeline reconstruction and identifying high-risk time periods potentially related to Alina's disappearance, the field command team initiated the advanced search phase using specialized equipment to extend surveillance beyond what could be observed by the naked eye or manual search methods. The goal of this phase was to scan the entire terrain for hidden heat signatures, objects, or ground disturbances in a broader area that foot teams could not efficiently cover in a short time. First, the Henry County Sheriff's Office coordinated with the district's Air Support Unit to deploy a helicopter equipped with FLIR to conduct aerial thermal scanning. The flight was launched that same midday to take advantage of temperature differentials between ground surfaces, water, and human bodies, or recently disturbed objects. The FLIR system flew parallel transects, covering the entire Parkson neighborhood, open land extending westward, roadside lawns, and the area adjacent to Cotton Indian Creek. The FLIR operators monitored live feeds for any anomalous heat points such as human forms, heavy clothing, recently placed objects in the cold environment, or signs of movement across grass. However, the collected data showed no suspicious thermal signals. Recorded heat points included only small animals, vehicles moving on distant roads, and routine activity in neighboring homes, with none matching the scale of a 6-year-old child's body or an adult carrying an object. In parallel with FLIR, the ground team deployed drone mapping to survey tall grass, dense brush, and inaccessible terrain. These areas were prioritized for their potential to conceal traces or objects related to the disappearance if someone moved through at night. The drone was programmed for grid pattern flights, capturing high-resolution panoramic photos and continuous video for later analysis. Focus was on two main zones, the vacant land behind the western fence and the edge of the trail leading into the sparse forest. Analysis of drone imagery showed no clear disturbance to grass or ground. Any broken grass tips appeared to result from morning personnel search activity, with no drag marks or suspicious material clusters. In the tall grass area along Cotton Indian Creek, the drone recorded numerous old footprints from pedestrians or fishermen from previous days, but none formed a consistent path that could relate to Alina's movement. The dive team and underwater surge group continued, inspecting the waterways in Cotton Indian Creek using sonar, particularly deeper, slower-flowing sections where objects could become lodged. Sonar scanned along the creek bed, collecting spectral data to detect solid objects or anomalous materials underwater. This was time-intensive, requiring meter-by-meter movement along the creek, but yielded no signals suggesting foreign objects or recent signs within reach. Strong water flow after the cold night increased the likelihood of small objects being swept away, but sonar could still detect larger items if present. Results were all negative. Another ground team was assigned to inspect 3 abandoned wells in the southern wooded area, where terrain was rugged and seldom visited. These wells were old structures, largely filled over years with dry leaves and soil, but still posed a risk if deliberately used to hide objects. The team examined each well by observing the rim for fresh soil disturbance, footprints, or subsidence signs. When officers shone lights deep into the wells, no unusual objects or signs of recently disturbed mud or stone were found. All were photographed for inclusion in the scene file. After completing the 4 advanced search prongs airborne FLIR, drone mapping, underwater sonar, and abandoned well checks, the command team compiled all collected data. The overall conclusion was that no new evidence, thermal signals, or environmental traces were recorded in the expanded area. Although the search covered the most complex terrain points, the results provided no clear guidance on Alina's possible location or route of movement or transport. This left the investigation continuing to rely on previously collected evidence along with detailed analysis of the environment inside and around the home, as the expanded area offered no additional usable data to guide the next steps of the investigative force. After completing the advanced search phase without recovering additional peripheral traces, the investigative force refocused on the basement, the most prominent point of suspicion in the entire scene and the only location in the house showing structural irregularity. A specialized forensic reconstruction team was deployed to conduct meticulous analysis of remaining physical traces. They began with the basement window, noted as cracked open during the morning search. The window frame surface was scanned with oblique lighting to document dust distribution. The lower edge dust layer was displaced into two uneven thin strips, indicating recent contact or movement. At the left frame corner, a dust-free streak appeared in a narrow, elongated band, smaller than a palm, likely a point of contact from a hard object or human hand. The window glass showed a faint horizontal smudge consistent with a push outward from inside or a light pull inward from outside. However, the smudge was not clear enough to determine the primary direction of force. The analysis team continued collecting fibers caught on the wooden window edge, several light-colored polyester fibers and one darker fiberall, placed in evidence bags for lab submission. Moving to mechanical assessment, the team measured the force required to open the window from fully closed. Results showed the frame operated smoothly without significant force, meaning a small child could not open it independently, while an adult or teenager could do so without loud noise. Examination of slide marks on the frame indicated a feasible opening direction from inside pushing outward. However, these marks did not rule out opening from outside, as interior window dust was also partially displaced. All data was entered into a comparison table to assess intrusion feasibility. Beside the window, the faint shoe print near the wall base was included in the analysis group for footwear database comparison. The print was photographed with forensic scale and contrast adjusted to clarify sole pattern. Though too faint for exact size determination, the team identified two interrupted sole pattern segments with width consistent with adult footwear rather than children's shoes. When the photo sample was run through the database, the system returned several possible matches: common athletic shoes with herringbone rubber soles or light work boot lines. Due to insufficient detail, shoe style or brand could not be identified, but analysis ruled out this being a child's footprint. Continuing with the suitcase under the window, the forensic reconstruction team measured position, tilt angle, and distance between the suitcase and window edge. The suitcase was positioned against the wall, bottom facing outward, top flat, and is sufficient height to serve as a stepping point. The team simulated scenarios. An adult could step onto the suitcase and pass through the window in either direction, into or out of the basement. Comparing window dimensions to suitcase height showed combined reach sufficient for climbing without additional aids. The suitcase surface showed no major mud or deep scratches, but several faint friction marks appeared at edges, suggesting recent movement or pressing against another object. The team continued examining the basement space under the window, measuring the receiving area size for a person dropping or jumping down. No major dust disturbance was found on the floor, but dust at the wall edge showed a long diagonal streak corresponding to a long object or body part sweeping through during movement. Forensic reconstruction then combined all data into a possibility chain. The window had been physically opened recently. The suitcase positioned underneath was suitably placed to aid climbing. The faint adult-sized shoe print was near the window. Caught fibers did not match clothing described as Alina's or the parents by the family. Nevertheless, this evidence only demonstrated intrusion potential without clearly determining entry versus exit, and it remained unlinked to the precise time of Alina's disappearance. The linkage level stayed hypothetical, lacking biological traces or independent timing data. The forensic reconstruction team's preliminary conclusion noted the basement as a high-priority potential entry point, but the full traces were sufficient only to expand analysis, not to confirm activity through the window during the disappearance timeframe. After the forensic reconstruction team completed the basement structural evaluation and identified the suitcase under the window as a potential aid for climbing into or out of the space, the evidence analysis team shifted to examining the suitcase to determine its origin, degree of use, and potential connection to the party responsible for Alina's disappearance. First, the suitcase surface was swabbed using electrostatic dust lifting to collect adhered dust, fibers, and microscopic particles that could indicate contact environments. Preliminary analysis showed the suitcase was made of low-cost polycarbonate, blended with nylon fibers, typical of mass-market products sold at major regional supermarkets. The brand label on the zipper edge was worn and difficult to identify exactly, but stitching structure and wheel design indicated it belonged to the inexpensive segment common in McDonough area household goods stores from 2008-2011. This meant the suitcase could belong to any household in the area without distinctive identifying marks. Wood dust recovered from wheel grooves, and the underside was examined under optical microscopy, revealing numerous tiny fragments of light-colored mixed wood, commonly found in plywood used for flooring or walls in older homes in the region. This was not unusual, as the Parkson basement had rough-treated wood walls and plywood supports. But the analysis team noted additional darker brown dust particles inconsistent with the basement wood tones. This dust sample was isolated for physicochemical analysis to compare origins. Inside the suitcase, the team used low-angle lighting to inspect interior fibers and scratch marks. They found 3 polyester fibers approximately 3 to 5 millimeter long, dark blue, and light red, but not matching fabric types described by the family as belonging to Alina's or the parents' clothing. The suitcase interior showed minimal mold, indicating it had not been stored in a damp environment long-term. But the bottom exhibited 2 arc-shaped friction streaks suggesting it had been dragged or pushed across a hard surface. Continuing with fingerprint examination, technicians applied fluorescent powder to detect prints on the polycarbonate surface, but results were mixed with many incomplete, mostly smudged prints. This was attributed to the suitcase's dust-prone surface and multiple initial search team members accessing the basement area before full sealing. Although noise prints were removed using mild chemical washing, no prints were distinct enough for individual identification or comparison profiling. Thus, the suitcase could not provide usable fingerprints to standard identification levels. While conducting scene analysis, the investigative team reviewed community information to determine whether the suitcase had appeared in the area prior to the disappearance. Through interviews with nearby residents, one person living near the western fence reported seeing a similar dark blue suitcase in Harold Pierce's yard several months earlier while he was clearing items at a temporary dump site. This observation lacked legal evidentiary value but held directional significance, as the basement suitcase was not owned by the Parkson family, making any link between the suitcase and other neighborhood residents important data. Information regarding Pierce was entered into the file for parallel evaluation with other evidence, though no direct proof yet showed the suitcase belonged to him or was brought to the scene by him. The analysis team continued building an evidence linkage matrix in which the suitcase was placed in the category foreign object appearing inside the Parkson home, based on position and function. When combined with the cracked open basement window status and the faint shoe print below, the evidence chain formed a structure reinforcing the possibility of external involvement, distinct from scattered evidence like the yellow glove or pink fabric scrap found farther away. With analysis results on material, usage level, adhered fibers, and especially the local residents' confirmation that a similar suitcase had appeared in Harold Pierce's yard, this evidence was officially incorporated into the chain of analysis related to potential suspects. From that point, the suitcase was no longer viewed as an isolated foreign object, but became a critical link in the investigative file, requiring parallel comparison with other evidence to determine its actual connection to Alina's disappearance. In parallel with re-evaluating the physical evidence, the investigative team shifted focus to the 2-page letter recovered from the staircase area, the only informational evidence discovered inside the house. The letter was immediately transferred to the document examination group for forensic document analysis protocol, aimed at determining handwriting characteristics, paper material, ink type, and its relevance to items already present in the Parkson home. Initially, examiners used a comparison microscope to observe stroke features, noting pen line thickness, pressure variation, slant direction, and signs of hesitation. The handwriting showed irregular density changes, indicating the writer could not maintain consistent pressure on the paper surface. Curved letters exhibited inconsistent curvature, particularly in downward strokes. Pressure analysis revealed a series of deep impressions in vertical strokes, suggesting the writer tended to press harder when changing direction, while horizontal strokes showed lighter pressure, resulting in an overall lack of uniformity. These are characteristics commonly seen in documents written under psychological stress or when the writer deliberately attempts to alter their natural handwriting. The paper fiber structure was examined under polarized light, revealing it as common household printer or notepad paper, not premium grade. The cellulose fiber structure matched the notepad sheets seized by the search team from the Parkson couple's home office. However, when comparing the paper edges to the notepads in the home, examiners noted clear differences in tear patterns. The letter's edge had an uneven, slightly serrated tear, while the whole notepads showed uniform serration from the same cutting mold. This suggested the letter was not torn from any notepad present in the house, despite sharing similar material. Ink examination under visible and near-infrared light showed the ink on the letter reacted similarly to the ink from the 2 ballpoint pens seized from Alina's bedroom and the ground floor desk. However, investigators could not conclusively match the ink, as common blue ballpoint inks on the market have many similar spectral profiles. The only directional indicator was that the handwriting did not match samples from the parents. To rule out the letter being written by someone in the household, the examination team requested the parents provide multiple sample paragraphs under varying conditions, then compared them to the letter using automated analysis tools and manual evaluation. After several rounds of comparison, results showed no reliable similarities in letter structure, slant, or stroke force distribution between the parent samples and the letter. This allowed the team to preliminarily exclude the parents as the writer. The subsequent phase of document analysis focused on content and phrasing organization. Although the letter's text is not quoted in open files, examiners described the sentence layout as unusually elongated, with inconsistent line breaks and phrases atypical of the Parkson family's usual style. The analysis group compared the sentence structure to databases of misdirection letters documents often created in cases to mislead or simulate false motives. In the database, many such letters feature long constructed sentences, vague information, and roundabout phrasing to create an impression of complexity without substantial content. These characteristics matched the letter recovered from the staircase, leading examiners to classify it as likely a misdirection document rather than a genuine ransom or communication letter. Continuing with behavioral psychology analysis, the team used handwriting cues such as pressure differentials, unstable slant, and uneven vertical-horizontal letter distribution to build a writer behavioral model. These features suggested several possibilities. The writer deliberately altered their natural handwriting to avoid identification. The writer was unaccustomed to writing long letters, resulting in muscle fatigue shown through broken strokes, or the writer was attempting to mimic the tone of a fictional role to conceal true motives. The preliminary behavioral model described the writer as an individual with moderate preparation, familiar with pen and paper, but lacking sophisticated text creation skills. Possibly an adult not highly proficient in written language, or someone deliberately obfuscating information to delay analysis. Combining handwriting characteristics, paper material, and ink data, the examination team reached a key conclusion. The letter was highly likely created by someone outside the family, did not match the parents' handwriting samples, and showed no evidence of being written for genuine communication purposes. The letter was designated Evidence Item 6 and incorporated into the category of potential behavioral indicators for suspect profiling. The writer's behavioral model became important data for comparison with individuals living in the vicinity who had possible access to the Parkson home on the night of the disappearance. Based on all evidence and examination results obtained up to this point, the investigative team moved into the suspect narrowing phase using a multi-layered elimination process to identify individuals with access to the Parkson home during the disappearance window and with motive or capability to create the recorded traces. The initial suspect list was compiled based on 3 criteria: residence or presence in the immediate vicinity of the Parkson home on the night of December 25th, behavior before and after the disappearance, and alibis provided during preliminary interviews. The first group included residents in the neighboring area, encompassing 7 households living 1 to 3 houses away from the Parksons. The second group consisted of individuals who accessed the area professionally on December 25th, such as an electrician called to repair lines on the northern street, a delivery person who stopped by in the afternoon, and a sanitation worker who collected trash before the holiday. The final group included close acquaintances who visited the Parkson home during Christmas week, including 1 extended family member and 2 friend families of Emily. All these individuals were requested to provide statements and activity details from 5:00 p.m. on December 25th to 7:00 a.m. on December 26th. This data was then cross-checked against area traffic cameras, phone location data, and statements from nearby residents to verify alibi accuracy. The electrician was cleared after a camera at an intersection half a mile from the Parkson home recorded his vehicle leaving the area at 5:45 p.m., and phone data showed him at home more than 6 miles away from 8 p.m. through the next morning. The delivery person was confirmed to have completed his route before 4:30 p.m. and did not return to the Parkson area that evening. The sanitation worker was verified through the municipal vehicle's continuous GPS log operating in the Southern Commercial District, with no data indicating passage near the Parkson neighborhood during the suspect timeframe. Emily's family members and friends were excluded after verification via photos of their participation in Christmas activities at other locations. along with consistent statements from multiple independent witnesses. As the operational and familial suspect list narrowed, the investigative team focused on residents immediately adjacent to the Parkson home, particularly those with potential access to the backyard, western fence, or routine movement near the Parkson basement. 3 households were placed on the priority list for deeper analysis. The first household was an elderly couple living immediately to the east. Their statements were supported by doorbell camera footage showing them inside the home all evening. The second household had 2 teenagers, both confirmed attending a Christmas party at a relative's home more than 15 miles from town center. Phone data proved they were outside the area during the entire critical time frame. The third household, the residence of Harold Pierce, who had appeared during the expanded search, was retained for thorough evaluation due to an unverified alibi. Pierce stated he was home all night on December 25th, watching television, and went to bed early. No one else could confirm this. His phone data only showed connection to a nearby cell tower, without pinpointing his exact location inside the house or surrounding area. Pierce had no personal security cameras, and his home was not in range of any nearby traffic cameras. Notably, when investigators interviewed residents near the western fence, one reported having seen a dark blue suitcase similar to the one in the basement in Pierce's yard several months earlier while he was clearing items at a temporary dump site. Although this information was insufficient to confirm the basement suitcase belonged to him, it created an unavoidable link, especially since the suitcase was identified as a foreign object in the Parkson home and positioned suitably to aid climbing through the basement window. The investigative team also reviewed Pierce's activity log from the week before Christmas, gathering information on his movement habits, but found no clear anomalies. However, his early appearance in the search effort on the morning of December 26, despite not being requested and living relatively separately from the Parkson area, was noted in the file for behavioral consideration. When cross-referencing the letter writer's behavioral model with Pierce's demographic data, the team noted some compatibilities: average education level, occasional awkward phrasing, and his survey handwriting samples not fully matching the letter but showing signs of deliberate alteration in certain strokes. Nevertheless, no technical evidence confirmed him as the writer. The elimination chain continued to remove individuals not present in the neighborhood during key times, and final analysis narrowed the list to Pierce as the sole remaining potential suspect, meeting both conditions simultaneously: an independently unverifiable alibi and an indirect link to the foreign suitcase in the basement. However, the investigative team also concluded that all current data consisted primarily of directional indicators, lacking direct evidence such as DNA, identifiable fingerprints, or eyewitness sightings of Pierce near the basement window during the critical period. Therefore, the file explicitly stated there was insufficient grounds to seek a compulsory search warrant or arrest warrant for Pierce. The investigative process was forced to continue expanding analysis rather than relying on unsubstantiated speculation. When the multi-layered elimination process narrowed the suspect list to nearly only Harold Pierce but failed to produce any direct evidence, the investigative team entered the most challenging phase of the case, assessing the full scope of evidence and determining whether any realistic progress remained possible. After weeks of re-examining the scene, matching statements, analyzing behavior, and completing forensic files, the investigative force concluded they had still not obtained any biological traces confirming Alina's or a third party's presence in the basement or around the Parkson home. No blood stains, no epithelial cells, no usable DNA were found on the glove, pink fabric scrap, basement window, suitcase, or faint shoe print. All recovered evidence was either non-biological or so heavily contaminated that single-source DNA separation was impossible. DNA analysis techniques in 2011-2012 remained limited for trace samples and entirely unsuitable for handling mixed, unclear origin samples that had interacted with multiple surfaces. The scene technicians had attempted basic methods such as protein swabbing and enzyme detection, but results were negative or fell below scientific standards. The possibility that the suitcase and basement window related to entry or exit behavior was a reasonable hypothesis but could not be confirmed biologically, leaving investigative directions reliant on spatial inferences rather than empirical evidence. The team also faced technological limitations of the era. No private home security cameras covered the backyard, no motion sensors existed in the basement, and household devices showed no signs of nighttime access beyond an undetermined temperature adjustment. Meanwhile, the faint shoe print lacked sufficient clarity for tracing to specific shoe type or size, and footwear database comparisons yielded no legally valuable results. Neighborhood statements provided no breakthrough information. No one reported seeing strangers in the area on Christmas night, and no unusual noises were noted beyond some families mentioning they went to bed early due to cold weather. By early 2012, the investigative team held a comprehensive review meeting in which all major investigative avenues were re-examined. The absence of a body meant they could not determine the mechanism of Alina's disappearance, voluntary departure, abduction, or accidental incident. All remained within the realm of hypotheses. Combining all available data, the team was forced to acknowledge they lacked strong enough leads to pursue further legal measures, such as expanded search warrants or arrests for any suspect, including Pierce, the only remaining person under observation. Lacking biological evidence, identifying physical evidence, direct witnesses, and environmental monitoring systems, the case gradually entered complete stalemate. An official report was prepared in which the lead investigators stated that the active investigation phase no longer had grounds for continuation due to the absence of new leads or supplemental information capable of changing the case dynamics. In March 2012, the Alina Parkson missing person file was transferred to inactive status per Henry County Protocol for cases with no viable leads but remaining eligible for reopening with new technology, new statements, or additional evidence. This status change officially marked the case as a cold case, with the entire file sealed and archived pending future conditions that might allow continuation. From 2018, when the Henry County Sheriff's Office launched a program to review dormant files under new Georgia state standards, the Alina Parkson disappearance was prioritized due to its multiple pieces of evidence that had never been analyzed with modern technology. Investigator Daniel Moss, with over 10 years of experience in cold case analysis and prior involvement in several advanced forensic projects, was assigned lead responsibility for re-reviewing the entire file spanning 2011 to 2012. Moss began by collecting all original materials, scene reports, evidence collection logs, basement photographs, glove and pink fabric images, suitcase description documents, the 2-page letter, timeline data, and initial investigative results. He categorized them into 5 groups: physical evidence, documentary evidence, environmental traces, personnel data, and forensic reports. All were cross-referenced against current forensic standards, which had advanced significantly since 2011. In the first evaluation round, Moss noted that scene evidence had been collected according to the protocols of the time, but did not meet modern trace analysis standards. For example, the basement suitcase previously considered of unclear value had never been tested for trace DNA, nor fully analyzed for adhered dust or microscopic sediments on its surface. Moss noted that prior examinations covered only material composition and fingerprints, while 2011 technological limits made deeper exploitation nearly impossible. Additionally, he identified a significant flaw in the suitcase collection report. It was sealed only after multiple people had entered and exited the basement, creating a high contamination risk beyond acceptable levels. This rendered fingerprint data entirely valueless. However, Moss assessed the suitcase as still having potential, since modern protocols could isolate trace DNA from plastic surfaces or untouched handle edges that had never been tested before. When reviewing the 2-page letter recovered under the staircase carpet, Moss found the collection and preservation method relatively good, but still missing 2 critical steps: cellulose composition analysis of the paper and examination of adhered microfibers on the letter surface. He determined that while the paper appeared similar to the family's notepads, it did not fully match tiered structure. This should have been verified using fiber source analysis, a technique not widely available in 2011. Moss initially requested reanalysis of paper samples with modern toolsets to determine manufacturing origin, helping narrow possibilities for the writer possessing corresponding paper. Another flaw Moss identified was in the letter preservation log before being sealed in the paper evidence bag. The letter had been temporarily placed on the living room table for several minutes, long enough for potential hand sweat or fiber contamination from scene personnel. Though not a serious violation, this detail affected sample purity for trace DNA analysis. Moss noted that 2011 had no strict protocols for trace DNA preservation as exist today, but he evaluated this as a factor to consider in new analyses. When re-examining the letter writer's behavioral analysis report, Moss found the initial model had low accuracy due to lacking quantitative data. The misdirection content interpretation remained reasonable, but modern forensic language analysis algorithms could now compare the letter to text samples from area individuals to improve suspect narrowing. Moss proposed digitizing the entire letter and running it through the district's available handwriting sample analysis system. Continuing with environmental evidence, Moss cross-referenced fibers collected from the basement window edge and suspected dust from the suitcase. He discovered that 2011 reports only classified them by color and basic material group, whereas current microfiber analysis could determine manufacturing characteristics, dye composition, and surface treatment processes for more specific origin tracing. Moss drafted a proposal to send all samples to the state lab for reanalysis using FTR and SEM. The most significant finding in Moss's review was the potential to recover DNA from seemingly exhausted evidence. He re-examined scene photos of the basement window and noted that the wood edge where dust was displaced could have contacted a human hand, though no one in 2011 considered trace DNA collection there. With current microtouch DNA technology, Moss assessed the feasibility of recovering trace DNA from contact points such as window edges, suitcase handles, and even the letter's interior surface as entirely viable. When reviewing the timeline file, Moss also examined neighboring residents' phone data to determine whether any unusual calls, texts, or cell tower pings occurred during previously unresolvable gaps. 2011 metadata collection technology did not allow investigators to retrieve much of the detail possible today, but Moss evaluated the possibility of using modern analysis to recover portions of old metadata from archived records as worth attempting. In his memorandum to command, Moss emphasized that the case reached stalemate not due to lack of evidence, but because contemporary technology could not process evidence at the micro level. He highlighted two key initial investigative shortcomings: uncontrolled contamination during suitcase collection and incomplete assessment of the letter's paper source. Both could be rectified through reanalysis under modern standards. At the end of the evaluation, Moss formally proposed using genetic genealogy, a technique non-existent in 2011, but now a critical tool in low DNA cases. This breakthrough method allows comparison of trace DNA recovered from evidence with expanded open genealogical databases to identify distant relatives of the sample contributor, thereby narrowing suspects based on kinship principles. Moss's proposals were approved by the expert panel, and the Alina Parkson case file was transferred from inactive status to cold case review protocol. Marking the first time in nearly a decade, the case had an opportunity for reopening based on new advances in forensic science. After the file was transferred to the cold case review process and investigator Daniel Moss's proposals were approved, the first priority evidence sample sent to the state laboratory in Texas was the edge of the two-page letter, the area Moss assessed as having the highest potential for retaining trace DNA. The lab employed micro-touch DNA technique, an optimized method for paper surfaces that have been handled by human hands but no longer yield usable fingerprints. From the letter's edge, technicians recovered an extremely small amount of DNA, insufficient for a standard DNA profile but adequate for amplification under a special protocol to generate a partial molecular profile. When this sample was compared to the current criminal DNA database, no direct matches appeared, which was expected since the depositor was not in the convicted offender system. Following Moss's proposal, the partial DNA sample was forwarded for genetic genealogy analysis, where SMP segments were compared against open genealogical databases voluntarily contributed by citizens to commercial platforms. After multiple algorithmic iterations, the system identified a genealogical match level with several individuals who had public DNA profiles. These were not suspects but distant relatives of the person who left the DNA trace. The matching results indicated a third to fourth degree kinship connection, sufficient to reconstruct a reverse family tree. When piecing the genealogical branches together, the analysis team realized that many individuals on the match list shared a common connection to the lineage of Harold Pierce, who had been on the initial potential suspect list but could not be concluded due to lack of direct evidence. The Texas lab standardized the match degree on a genetic statistical scale, showing the probability that the DNA source belonged to an individual within Pierce's direct line family group was significantly higher than for any other population group in the surrounding area. Although the recovered DNA profile was only partial and did not identify a specific individual, the genetic genealogy algorithm concluded that the DNA sample was highly likely left by a male from the Pierce family paternal branch. This was an extremely weighty result, because up to this point, no evidence had directly or indirectly linked Pierce to the interior of the Parkson home. The appearance of trace DNA on the edge of the letter evidence discovered inside the living space placed Pierce, or someone closely blood-related to him, firmly within the scope of strong suspicion. To reinforce the conclusion, the lab conducted secondary validation analysis by running reversed probability modeling to rule out random coincidence within the Henry County population. Results showed the probability that the DNA depositor did not belong to Pierce's kinship group was negligible. It also ruled out contamination from investigative personnel, as none of their profiles appeared in the genealogical network. Analysts also examined the possibility of indirect transfer of DNA to the letter. But the fact that the letter had been placed under the carpet location with no prior interaction with household residents diminished the value of the random contamination hypothesis. After completing the comparison chain, Moss received the official report from the Texas lab. In the report, the laboratory affirmed that the DNA sample recovered from the letter edge had a clear genealogical connection to relatives of Harold Pierce, and the match level fell within the threshold that investigative agencies typically regard as a genetic investigative lead, a signal strong enough to reopen the investigation with focused direction. The report also noted that although the DNA sample was insufficient for criminal database entry or CODIS upload, it was sufficient to conclude that the letter had been handled or written by someone within the blood relation group to Pierce, and the likelihood that the letter was introduced into the Parkson home by an individual outside this group was extremely low. On that basis, Moss drafted a summary memo to the cold case division leadership, concluding that this was the most significant discovery since 2011, as it was the first time evidence inside the Parkson home carried a genealogical trace related to Pierce. Although not direct incriminating evidence, this finding provided a sufficiently strong foundation to move the file from review status to reopened investigation status with a new focus. With this result, Pierce, who had previously been only a potential suspect, now became the primary investigative target, and subsequent steps could be implemented based on the newly confirmed genetic link between him and the evidence inside the crime scene. After the genetic genealogy analysis results indicated a trace DNA connection between the letter in the Parkson home and relatives of Harold Pierce, the investigative team decided to restart the file with a new focus, beginning with continuous surveillance of Pierce for 2 weeks to assess his current behavior and determine whether any elements related to risk or evidence destruction potential existed. Surveillance activities included recording daily routines, times Pierce left and returned home, travel routes, locations visited, list of direct contacts, and degree of behavioral anomalies. Surveillance results showed Pierce lived quite isolated, with minimal social interaction, and frequently left home early in the morning to walk through the sparse forest near the neighborhood and area overlapping with routes searched in 2011. He had no stable employment, spending most of his time at home or wandering around abandoned land areas. No overtly criminal behavior was recorded, but the repetition of his walking route and his frequent carrying of a small backpack led the investigative team to assess a very high likelihood that Pierce was storing evidence in his home or the areas he frequented. After 2 weeks of surveillance, investigator Daniel Moss drafted a report requesting a search warrant for Pierce's property, including his residence, backyard shed, and personal vehicle. The report detailed the chain of grounds, genealogical DNA match, foreign suitcase found in the Parkson basement with witness statements of having seen a similar one in Pierce's yard, notable movement behavior, proximity of residents to the crime scene, and lack of a solid alibi during the disappearance window. The Henry County Court reviewed and approved the search warrant, authorizing execution within the next 48 hours. The search was conducted in the morning while Pierce left home for his habitual walk. The investigative team entered the residence following legal procedure, recording the entire process on video. In the living room, no signs of disarray were found, but many old items were piled up. The real noteworthy discoveries appeared in the backyard shed. There, technical personnel discovered a dark blue suitcase with size and design nearly identical to the one under the Parkson basement. The suitcase was positioned on a low wooden shelf, covered with a thin layer of dust, but its exterior surface showed scratches similar to those documented on the scene suitcase. This was the first evidence in Pierce's home with a direct connection to evidence from the Parkson residence. Continuing the sweep, the team found a pair of rubber-soled shoes in the shoe cabinet near the back door. When the shoe sole pattern was compared to photos of the faint shoe print recovered under the basement window, the features, though simplified, showed correspondence in 2 positions, the same vertical serration pattern and 2 diagonal ridges. Although the shoes were no longer clean enough for a complete sole impression, this match was recorded as an important link in the evidence chain. In Pierce's bedroom, the search team seized a local forest map marked with numerous pencil notations in the area bordering the creek. including several positions overlapping with zones searched in 2011, but yielding nothing at the time. The notations had no annotations but were located at distances consistent with Pierce's walking habits, making the map indirect evidence indicating his clear awareness of lesser-traveled routes. In the shed, approximately 2-meter length of nylon cord was found in a toolbox. The nylon cord was a common household type, but matched in color and size a small loose cord segment noted in the 2011 basement that the investigative team had not then treated as standalone evidence. Preliminary analysis showed the nylon cord in Pierce's home had wear marks on one section, possibly from having been pulled hard or subjected to tension. This was not conclusive evidence but heightened suspicion when placed in the context of the other items. The investigative team continued to seize the computer hard drive and 3 old storage devices from Pierce's bedroom. They were sealed for digital analysis to check access history, stored image locations, log data, and any information related to the forest area, suitcase-like objects, or documents connected to the Parkson home. Although hard drive data was not analyzed immediately, the seizure satisfied the requirement to preserve electronic evidence. After compiling all evidence recovered from the search, Moss constructed a direct linkage chain. The suitcase in Pierce's home was too similar to deny connection to the basement suitcase. His shoes had a sole pattern matching the faint basement shoe print. The forest map showed markings consistent with the well location. The nylon cord bore signs of force application, and the genealogical DNA from the letter indicated a blood relation link. When these pieces were arranged into a single logical sequence, the investigative team established that Pierce was no longer merely a potential suspect, but an individual with a real connection to the disappearance scene. Although no direct biological evidence existed at the 2011 basement, the emergence of corresponding evidence in his home, more than a decade later, created a clear connective thread, sufficient to advance the file to the next phase and designate Pierce as the central investigative subject in the Alina Parkson disappearance case. After the chain of evidence recovered from Harold Pierce's home was established and linked into a sufficiently strong logical system, an official arrest warrant was approved by the Henry County Court. In May 2022, Pierce was arrested right outside his front door while preparing to leave for his morning walk. He was handcuffed for procedure, read his Miranda rights, and transported to the detention center for questioning. In the very first interrogation session, investigator Daniel Moss presented the key evidence. The basement suitcase at the Parkson home and the suitcase in Pierce's home had matching size, construction, and scratch marks. Pierce's shoes had a sole pattern consistent with the faint shoe print recorded in 2011. The forest map with markings matching locations Pierce frequented, and especially the genetic genealogy conclusions showing the DNA sample on the letter edge originated from Pierce's direct line family branch. Confronted with this evidence, Pierce reacted by completely denying any involvement, stating he never set foot in the Parkson home and had no reason to be connected to the disappearance. However, during the hours-long interrogation, he repeatedly changed details in his statements, from insisting he was home all night on December 25, 2011, to saying he went out to smoke, then shifting to took a walk around the backyard area, rendering his account entirely inconsistent. Investigator Moss employed a tactic of confronting each piece of evidence against each shift in Pierce's statements, pointing out that the points he denied were contradicted by objective facts. When asked to explain why the suitcase in his home matched the basement suitcase, or why his genealogical DNA appeared on the edge of the letter found inside the Parkson home, Pierce remained silent for long periods, then offered disjointed and unrealistic explanations, such as claiming, "Someone took my suitcase without telling me," or "My DNA could have gotten on the paper when I passed by their family," which was scientifically and positionally impossible given where the letter was found. Facing mounting pressure and explanatory dead ends, Pierce began showing signs of psychological collapse. When Moss showed him photos of the basement window and the suitcase position directly beneath, combined with the faint shoe print and the conclusion that the window was the only reasonable entry, Pierce lowered his voice, shifting from complete denial to partial admissions. Finally, in the third interrogation session, in the presence of his attorney and 2 other investigators, Pierce admitted he had taken Alina out of the house on Christmas night, stating he entered through the basement window after seeing the lights off and believing no one would notice. He described that Alina did not scream and that he only wanted to take the girl out of there, but did not disclose a clear motive. When questioned about Alina's condition when leaving the house, he evaded details and spoke circumstantially, but ultimately admitted the girl was no longer moving when he carried her out of the neighborhood. Investigators pressed for the body's location, and after several minutes of silence, Pierce stated he had hidden the body in an abandoned stone well on the edge of Chattahoochee National Forest, more than an hour's drive from McDonough. This location had not been within the 2011 search radius and was only accessible via trail little known to outsiders. This statement was immediately documented and preliminarily verified by cross-referencing with the forest map seized from Pierce's home where the well location had been faintly marked. With this final confession, for the first time in over 10 years, the Alina Parkson disappearance case had a direct lead to the body's hiding place, and the evidence chain linking Pierce became solid grounds to proceed with the next steps of the investigation. The forensic team, along with a special search unit, was deployed to the stone well site on the edge of Chattahoochee National Forest immediately after Harold Pierce's statement was deemed sufficiently grounded for exhumation. The dense forest area, rugged terrain, and narrow access required manual transport of equipment over many hours. Upon reaching the exact coordinates Pierce provided, the forensic group noted a stone well approximately 3 meters deep, its mouth covered by accumulated loose stone and decayed leaves over many years. After establishing the scene perimeter and photographing, the forensic team removed surface layers one by one using soft brushes and lifting tools to avoid disturbing the underlying structure. At the third soil layer, they discovered fragments of children's pink and blue fabric mixed in the dirt matching the clothing description of Alina provided by the family in 2011. Descending another meter, the forensic team located a small skeletal set along with a few remaining personal items, a plastic shirt button, a nylon cord segment wrapped around the leg area, and a wrist bone fragment still bearing a partially decayed children's bracelet. The skeletal remains were recovered section by section, placed in separate preservation boxes, and sealed at the scene. Forensic analysis at the laboratory followed immediately, with the bone specialist determining the skeletal age consistent with a 6-year-old child, and height and bone structure matching Alina's medical records. Bone marrow DNA was extracted and compared to parental DNA samples. Results matched 100%, confirming the victim's identity. Analysis of the nylon cord wrapped around the skeletal leg area also showed material consistent with the nylon segment seized from Pierce's home, along with wear marks compatible with a rusty knife blade found in his toolbox. The bone traces showed no sharp force trauma, but exhibited cartilage compression signs consistent with Pierce's description of lowering the body into the well by temporarily binding the legs and pulling through the mouth. Once the forensic conclusions were finalized, the investigative team constructed a complete evidence chain for court presentation. The basement entry point with cracked open window, foreign suitcase in the basement matching the one in Pierce's home, faint shoe print and Pierce's shoes with matching sole pattern, 2-page letter bearing trace DNA genealogically linked to the Pierce family line, forest map with markings matching the stone well location, and finally Pierce's own confession leading to the discovery of Alina's remains. The defense attorney attempted to discredit by arguing that trace DNA was insufficient for direct conviction, but the court ruled that the evidence chain was logically connected and seamless, incapable of innocent explanation. The discovery of the remains at the precise location Pierce provided, combined with the correspondence of evidence between the 2011 scene and his property, was the decisive factor that collapsed the defense argument. The jury unanimously found Pierce guilty of kidnapping and causing death under aggravated circumstances, followed by concealment of a corpse. The judge sentenced him to the life imprisonment without parole, emphasizing the dangerous nature of the conduct and the prolonged suffering inflicted on the victim's family for over a decade. The Alina Parkson case file was officially closed at the end of 2022. 11 years after the girl's disappearance, marking one of the most complex cold case investigations in Henry County and a testament to the pivotal role of modern forensic technology in solving cases once thought unsolvable. The story of Alina Parkson's disappearance, with the cold, dark basement, the strange suitcase under the window, the 2-page letter hidden under the carpet, and the over 11-year journey from deadlock to breakthrough thanks to trace DNA carries many profound lessons for life in the United States today, where community security and trust in forensic science increasingly play an essential role. One of the most thought-provoking details is the cracked open basement window, a small detail but the first indication of intrusion. In modern life, especially in peaceful suburbs, many families still believe this area is safe, thereby overlooking home protection measures. The story reminds us that security never relies solely on feeling a slightly ajar window A loose lock, or even the habit of not checking the basement, can open the door to risk. The foreign suitcase placed under the window also shows that objects now belonging to the living space are always signals that need attention. In real life, observing small changes in the environment, an unusual object appearing, a fresh footprint in the snow can be the key to early threat detection. The case-solving journey further highlights the role of forensic technology. Trace DNA on the letter edge, unusable in 2011, became decisive evidence in 2022. The lesson learned: scientific progress can change the outcome of what seems helpless. In life, this encourages us not to give up just because there is no solution at present. What is right must be persistently pursued because the future may open new opportunities. And finally, the story reminds us that the community is part of safety. Harold Pierce's appearance in the search group in action, masking behind a positive facade, is a reminder that truth sometimes lies right in the familiar. Therefore, vigilance is not about suspecting everyone, but about staying alert, paying attention, and reporting anomalies. The Alina Parkson story is not just a solved cold case. It is a reminder that caution, science, and community can together protect the most important things in life. Thank you for following the journey to solve this cold case that lasted over a decade. If you want to see more stories of justice revealed through science and perseverance, please hit subscribe to the channel to join us. See you in the next video, where every small clue can lead to a big truth.